Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 338. I am recording this episode both in audio as well as in video format for my YouTube channel on February 27th, 2025, and this will go live on March 3rd, 2025. And for today's episode, it's going to be just me. If you've been listening for the past number of weeks, you know I've had some guests on. Last week I did a solo episode, and today I'm back by myself as well. Got some guests planned for the future. So if you like those guest episodes, there's more coming. For today, I was sitting thinking what I was going to focus on today, and I thought, I know the kinds of questions that yoga teachers ask me a lot, but let me use AI to see what AI would tell me yoga teachers are asking a lot about. And so I went into Chat GPT and I asked it, what are common questions that yoga teachers ask? And I asked it for 10 questions. And I got the top 10 questions that yoga teachers ask according to Chat GPT. Now, as you know, AI is pulling from content out there, I guess you could say, in the public domain. So for the most part, that means online content that could be anywhere. It could be questions on posts on social media. It could be articles written. It could be comments to articles written. It could be YouTube videos. There's just so many sources that AI can pull from. So as I go through these questions, it'll be interesting for you to see if these are questions that you have. And I would love to know, send me a DM on Instagram and let me know how many of these questions were actually questions that resonated with you, things that you've thought about and wondered, I wonder what the answer is to that. I can tell you from the reading of the questions, which we'll go through in a minute, they are questions that I've heard about over and over and over again. And so my experience as a teacher who talks to a lot of yoga teachers every day is consistent with the results that I got. Now, I didn't plan, obviously, what questions AI was going to give me, and I didn't plan my responses. So other than just a quick read of these questions, I am diving into them with you. So I want you to imagine it's almost as if we are together at a workshop and I'm getting these questions in live time, kind of like a live Q&A. And so this is really spontaneous. This is not the sort of thing that I've rehearsed or not the sort of thing where I've written out my answers. So I want this to give you a sense almost like we're doing this in live workshop format. So with that as the introduction, let's get to question 1. So I'm going to just take a look at my notes here because I printed it out from the AI readout. How do I attract more students to my classes? Okay, so here's the thing. Number 1, this is a great question. However, this suggests that you have control over what people do. And while from a marketing standpoint, this is a good question, and we can talk about things through the lens of marketing and marketing tactics, as yoga teachers, it's important that I share with you there's another way of looking at this. And I want to actually look at it that way first. And then, of course, we'll get into some tactical things you can do. And the reason I want to approach it that way is because the kind of yoga teacher who's leading with this question, what's usually driving it is a belief that if I have more people in my classes, I will be a more successful yoga teacher, or I will be a happier yoga teacher, or I will feel validated. I'll feel like I'm doing it right. And in my opinion, nothing could be further from the truth. You can teach classes with 2 people consistently and absolutely love what you're doing. So the number of people in your class does not equate to feeling happy, content, confident, satisfied, like you're making an impact. And furthermore, the number of people in the class might have nothing to do with your competence as a yoga teacher. Maybe you just teach at a time of day when it's a really popular time that people come to yoga. So I I really want to warn, because oftentimes this question is asked by a yoga teacher who's searching for validation. They're searching for validation coming from an external source, that external source being the head count. So I want to just bring that part up first. Now, let's go to the marketing tactics. One of the best ways you can grow your classes is to invite the people who come to your classes to come back, to say at the end of each class you teach, the next time I'll be here is XYZ date. I'd love to have you come back. I'd love to see you again, or see you at the next class. The next time I'm teaching is blank. Let them know that you want to see them again and when that again will be. So that's number one. Number two, another great way to attract more students to your classes is to seem interested in what they're doing. So as they're coming in and setting up, maybe striking up a conversation. How's your practice going? Smile. Give them a couple of props and just strike up a conversation. What are you working on in your practice? Ask them at the end of class if they have any questions. These sorts of things show students that you're interested and invested in how they're doing. And that will build connection and encourage them and give them a feeling that coming back to your class is a great fit for them. Another thing that you can do, and this might sound a little controversial, I'll throw it out there anyway, is to walk around the room as you're teaching. Now, I'm not saying that's something that you have to do. It just allows you to see your students more and puts you in closer proximity to them, so that even if you're not giving them a hands-on assist, you can give them a cue that matches what's happening for them without even saying their name. I'm not suggesting that you walk around and you need to get to know everybody's name so you can say, oh, Anne, can you shift your knee a little bit more to the right? I'm not suggesting that at all. What I am suggesting, though, is that when you walk around more, you have more of an ability to customize cues to what's happening, and that can help students feel seen. Now, I did mention about the time of day your class is. The time of day your classes might have an impact on how many people you have. This may or may not be true in your community, in the particular place you're teaching. However, it can. So factor that in to the class numbers you have. Those are some highlights for focusing on class numbers and looking to shift your class numbers if you want to shift them in a way to get more people into your classes. But you need to know that ultimately you can't really control this particular metric. All those things I just shared with you are steps in a good direction. They still might not get you the numbers you want. So ultimately, the question for you is, what's behind you asking this question? And let's really have a conversation about that, because that's really, I think, what the question is. So oftentimes this question is really a mask for the real question. Okay, question number two. What is the best way to sequence a yoga class? So my answer to that is the best way to sequence a yoga class is to sequence it in a way where you can teach it and feel really confident teaching it. And that's the answer. Because the way this question is worded, and I'll bet, this question would not be coming up as the number 2 question if a lot of yoga teachers weren't asking this question. And the reason a lot of yoga teachers are asking this question is because they believe, and you may believe this too, that there is a best way to sequence a yoga class. And the answer to that question is that there isn't a best way to sequence it. You can teach it however you want. Now, I know embedded in that part, the best way, is again the real question you're asking, which is, what's the right way? Or what's a way where people will get a good workout? Or what's a way that's anatomically correct? Or what's a way that gives people a good opportunity to both strengthen and stretch the muscles in their body? Or what's a balanced way, right? Like there's a real question under there. And again, there's many different styles of yoga. So depending on the style, you might have a different answer to each one of those questions. So again, just like with the class size question, when you ask me what's the best way to sequence a yoga class, what I would ask you is I would ask you, how do you want to feel when you're teaching your classes? And what do you love about yoga? And I know that sounds like a mismatch, but just stick with me here for a second. Because if you say to me, I love teaching classes that are slow flow, that give students an opportunity to breathe, to notice their breath, to do these long stretches in the poses, I would say, well, then that's the best sequence for you to create and teach. One that is a reflection of what you love about yoga. Because right out of the gate, that means you're going to be teaching in a way that matches what you love about yoga. Instead of you creating a sequence that you think you have to create that checks all these boxes that you heard on Instagram from some yoga creator is the right way to sequence a class. But now you're going in and teaching a sequence that doesn't even match what you love about yoga. That's not a sustainable way to teach. So yes, we can have an academic conversation about what makes sense from a sequencing point of view. We don't have time to go into that now, but let's just say we can have that conversation. The idea, though, is, again, this is the wrong question, but this is the question that teachers ask because this is part of the narrative in the yoga industry, that there is a best way to sequence. But no, the right question, and this is just my opinion, is how do I want to teach? What is inspiring me to teach yoga in the first place? And what does that look like? You know, I know plenty of people that I grew up with in the yoga world. We all went to hot power yoga. And that was what we loved. Now, I've shifted my perspective and I don't really love that style of class as much anymore. But back then, that's what I loved. And so when I began teaching, that's what I taught. And thank God, because I got really good teaching it, in part because I started to teach what I love. But if I felt pressure to teach a slow Iyengar based flow, I would have hated it because that style of yoga didn't speak to me. So again, the answer to the question is the answer lies within you. Start with what you love and create a sequence that reflects that. Okay, question number 3. How do I handle students with injuries or limitations? So number 1, unless you're having a conversation with a student, you don't know the injuries or limitations they have. Having said that, if you're walking around and watching them, you can see the signs of a particular limitation. And even though you don't know for sure what might be the cause of it, what it will look like oftentimes is the student will be out of alignment. Now, dealing with injuries as a subject matter really, number 1, requires that you understand the fundamentals of anatomy. And if you've listened to my podcast for any amount of time, you know that I teach anatomy in my one-on-one program, and I also touch on it a bit in my group program. So when I say things like being able to help students with injuries in your classes starts with understanding anatomy, I'm not going to leave you hanging. I'm going to encourage you to enroll in my program. One of them, my group or my one-on-one, so that I can teach you the anatomy. So I'm not going to just bring that up and then just leave you hanging to go off and try to figure out anatomy on your own. I would love to teach it to you. So you have to understand anatomy. There's no way, let's just be crystal clear. There is no way you can help a student who has an injury if you don't understand the fundamentals of anatomy, because if you don't, you're just guessing, okay? Or you're just sharing information that you heard from somebody else. And that's not helpful. That's just being a repeater. So once you've done the work to learn the fundamentals of anatomy, and notice I'm saying the fundamentals, I'm not saying all of anatomy. And again, I teach the fundamentals. So when you enroll in my program, I'm going to take you through the 10 steps, not 100, not 50, not 500 hours, not 300 hours, 10 steps. That's it. So once you're at that point where you've done the work to learn the fundamentals of anatomy, what you then have an ability to do is to listen to a student, hear what the injury is, and create modifications and a modified approach to help that student practice yoga. Now, because there are hundreds of types of injuries, there's no way we can answer this question in one way that we can apply to all students. But the really interesting thing that will happen to you when you truly learn the anatomy is that you will be able to, as I am able to, pull out several common themes that only a teacher who understands anatomy appreciates. And I'm just going to go into one of them now to illustrate my point. There is an anatomical concept known as range of motion, ROM. Range of motion is a reflection of the movement ability at the joint, at any joint in the body. And it can be measured. And it can be measured as normal range of motion or not normal range of motion. So for instance, the shoulder, you know, as a human being who has a shoulder, that you can take your arm and swing it up to the sky and swing it all the way around in a big circle. So to just keep things simple, that's the range of motion of the shoulder. I think it's 180 degrees maybe. But if you had a student in your class who couldn't reach their arms all the way up to the sky, that person will be exhibiting a range of motion problem. And it could be the sign of a bony limitation, a muscular limitation, a muscle too tight, a muscle too weak, problem with the fascia. We don't know as the yoga teacher because we can't see inside the body. But we are alerted to the fact that there is a problem because the range of motion that we see visually is limited. And so we can understand, as a result of doing the work to learn the anatomy, that range of motion is a common theme that is a reflection of injury, and we can also use it as a way to offer modifications. So a perfect example would be if I have a student who has a range of motion limitation in their shoulder, they're not sure what the reason is, they haven't received medical treatment for it, but I know that range of motion is a variable I can play with. When they go into Warrior One, instead of taking their arms all the way up to the sky, I'll have them bring their hands to their heart or reach their arms out ahead of them. Because I know that in doing those two modifications, they're limiting the range of motion requirement for the shoulder. So we don't have time to go into this in more detail, but I want you to see that learning anatomy is not so that you can answer every single question every single student for the rest of your life will ever ask you about the body, because there's absolutely no way you can ever know enough to be able to answer all those questions. What you will be able to do, though, is develop a teaching approach that allows you to answer questions in a highly intelligent way and takes into account several common themes that are part of understanding the key aspects of anatomy. So that's my answer to that question. All right, next one. How can I confidently teach without relying on a script? Okay, so I love this. I've talked about this in a lot of earlier episodes. If you want to teach without a script, the best way to do that is to teach the same sequence over and over again until you can teach it without a script. That's it. Now, there is one other aspect of this that I'll share to make it even easier for you. Instead of teaching with a script, teach with a framework. And what a framework is, this is something I've talked about over and over again, is an approach to cueing, not a script. So instead of going in with a script that lists out the poses and what to say, go into your class with a framework in your head that guides how you'll cue. So I can go in and say to myself, the framework I'm using for today's class with respect to cueing is to teach action cues only. So now I don't need a script. I can organize the thoughts in my head around this framework of teaching from action. So I'm going to start the class out. In my mind, I'm saying to myself, teach from action. Okay, everybody, let's start in child's pose. Bring yourself down to the mat, rest your head on the ground, reach your arms out in front of you, rest your hips on your heels. Right, so notice what I did there. I simply gave them action cues to get them in the pose. So that's a mental framework you can use so that you don't need to use a script. In terms of the part of your script that is the poses and the order in which they show up in the sequence, the best way to drop the script so that you don't need it to know what comes next in the sequence is to teach what I call a signature sequence over and over again until you remember it. I've done so many episodes where I've talked about this. And I actually this week had a video go viral. It's at almost 10,000 views and almost 300 comments about this exact topic. So I don't want to keep, we've got other questions to go over. I know what you're thinking. I know you're thinking, well, Karen, how long do I need to teach this signature sequence? Well, first of all, the word need suggests that you think I'm telling you what to do because you're asking me how long, Karen, do I need to do this? I don't know. I'm not the boss of you. Teach it until you get to the point that you want to get to as a teacher. This question is asking, how can I confidently teach without relying on a script? So the two variables, the two results in that question, I want to feel confident and I want to teach without a script. So teach the same sequence until those two results are met. And whatever your results are, teach it until your results are met. So it's not about what I say, and certainly you don't need to do anything. If you enjoy going in and using a script, then keep changing your sequence. If you enjoy going in and having your mind go blank and worrying about what comes next in the sequence, then keep changing your sequence. You can choose the experience you want. But see, a lot of teachers don't think they can. They think they can't choose they think they can't choose the experience they want because they believe they need to change the sequence. So they feel powerless to teach in a way that they love, that feels easy, because they're beholden to this belief that they have to change it. Hence the question, well, Karen, if I teach a signature sequence, how long do I need to change? How long do I need to teach it? You don't need to do anything. You are your own boss. You are a big person. You are an adult. You can make your own choices, but I know you don't think you can because if you did, you wouldn't be asking me the question phrased that way. Right? I want you to see, and the reason I'm being sort of strict with this way I'm answering it, or not strict, but I'm being kind of forceful in my answer, is because I want to break through the thoughts in your head that are driving you to teach in a way that feels completely disconnected from what you want, as a way to expose the beliefs that you have that are driving you to teach in a way that is completely inconsistent with how you want to teach. That's why I'm being sort of emphatic about this as we discuss it. Okay, next question. What should I charge for my classes and workshops? What do you think you're worth? What do you think you're worth? Because that's really the real question behind that question. Now, yes, just like with question number one, with respect to how can I grow my class size, there is a marketing aspect to this question. What does the market demand? What will the market hold as a reasonable price to charge? You know, rephrasing, what are other people in my area charging? What do yoga teachers typically charge? So I get it. I'm not answering these in an obtuse way to be a jerk, but I'm answering it in a different way because I know that there's really an underlying question there. So let's first take the easy answer. So generally speaking, yoga teachers are paid, and I've been teaching for 22 years, so I'm qualified to speak on this. Generally, yoga teachers are paid around $50 a class. In my opinion, if you're teaching someplace that pays less than $50 a class, I would strongly consider if that's a class opportunity you want to take. Now, there are nonprofits, there are corporate classes. I see things on Indeed.com all the time, schools, etc., where people pay teachers less than $50. And there may be instances where it makes sense for you to do that for other reasons. Maybe you're looking for experience. Maybe you're looking to build your schedule. Maybe it's a really convenient location. Maybe it's a place that you really want to get your foot in the door. Those are good reasons, maybe, for you to take a class where the pay is less than $50. And those are reasons that would justify that. What I would say, though, is a location that's offering a teacher less than $50 a class does not appreciate the value that yoga teachers bring. Now, of course, there may be budgetary concerns. Maybe it's a YMCA, they don't have a lot of funding available. Maybe it's a nonprofit, they haven't allocated budget for yoga. Maybe it's a church and they don't have, the location may reflect a lack of funding available to pay teachers. The idea, though, is when a teacher accepts, and $50 is a level that I'm picking, a number I'm picking based on years of experience of me teaching and teaching in lots of different places where the rate has been set, meaning mostly studios. Studios set the rate and teachers can't negotiate. And that's pretty much been the way for many, many years. And that's because if a studio says this is what we're going to pay teachers, and a particular teacher doesn't feel that that rate is a match for them, like it's too low, there are probably a handful of teachers that will take that slot. So studios often don't have an incentive to negotiate with a teacher because they know that there's somebody else they can get to be on the schedule, because there's typically more teachers out there than there are slots available. Now, of course, a studio owner, a small independent studio, might not be able to pay a teacher more than $30 a class from their budgetary standpoint. And that's fine. That's their decision. But you as a yoga teacher don't need to accept that if you don't feel that's a match for your value. What I'm suggesting is that $50 a class is a middle of the road amount for a group yoga class in a very standard location, meaning a studio or a gym. Once you get into specialty locations where it's not a yoga space and you're the expert going in to teach classes, then the rate should go up because you're going in as the expert into a non-yoga space. So let's say you're going into a school, you're going into a nonprofit, you're going into a rehab center, you're going into a hospital. Then you are being hired as the expert, so you set the rate. I did this for many, many years. I had a portfolio of all different opportunities in all different locations, many of whom never had yoga before I did outreach to them and set up a contract with them. For those opportunities, I charged anywhere between $125 and $200 a class because I was going in as the expert. And truly, honestly, in my opinion, that is about the rate that yoga teachers should be paid in studios for classes. Because the value of yoga and the skill of a yoga teacher to teach a group class in an environment where they don't know anything about the medical conditions of the people there, and they don't have any opportunity to have back and forth conversation with the students, but yet they are still tasked with teaching a group of people in a movement-based practice, is a highly skilled level of expertise. And I don't believe that $50 accurately reflects that. I think something more around 125 US dollars and upwards is a more accurate reflection of the level of expertise and skill that a yoga teacher is expending when, or demonstrating when they teach a class. I think it's very different from Pilates and fitness instruction and Zumba and And those teachers, I don't teach those things, so I can't speak on what their value is. So what I would generally say, we talked a little bit about the marketing side, and now we're talking a little bit more about just general things. I would say also with respect to privates, private sessions, I believe, should start at 125 US dollars and go up from there, depending on the customization that is required, the travel required, etc. So I don't want to go into a lot. We can talk more about this particular one. So don't forget, DM me with any questions you have. Okay, next thing, how do I prevent burnout as a yoga teacher? Burnout is a sign that teaching is really hard for you. Burnout is a sign that you're approaching teaching in a way that is way too hard for you. And that has nothing to do with your skill level, your knowledge level, your ability level. It just is a reflection of you're making it too hard. I can take a yoga teacher who knows how to make teaching feel easy and fun for them, and they could be teaching every single day, 7 days a week, and have literally no burnout. And I can take a yoga teacher teaching 3 times a week, completely burned out, but they're approaching it from the point of view of they're making it really hard. Right out of the gate, I'll say if you're practicing 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100% of the class with your students, you will physically get burned out. It's the more classes you teach, the more potential for burnout just on the physical level. Number 2, the more you change your sequence, the more your brain will have to learn a new sequence, the more brain power you'll need to expend, the more planning time you'll need to do. That will also burn you out. Number 3, the less consistent your teaching is with how you want to teach, and the more it's connected to how you think you have to teach, the more burnout you will experience. Because just like we've talked about with regard to a lot of the other questions, instead of you teaching how you want, you're teaching how you think you need to teach. And that is an absolute recipe for burnout because you're not teaching in a way that feels natural, authentic, and easy for you. So if this question resonates with you, I want you to answer right now. What would make teaching yoga feel so easy for you? I'm just going to give you a second here. What would make teaching feel so easy for you? What would that look like? So there you go. There's your answer. Whatever popped up in your head is your answer. Anything you are doing that goes against that result, don't do. Planning, don't do it. Practicing with them, don't do it. Speaking to anatomy when you don't understand anatomy, don't do it. Changing your sequence every week, don't do it. Like, I'm being facetious because I know it's not as easy for you as just stopping doing these things. But the thing is, your answer to that question, that's the result you want. So at least you have that as a starting point. Okay, that's all I'm going to say on this one. DM me what came up for you. I'd love to know. The next one, how can I create a unique teaching style that stands out? Best answer to this question is to be yourself. I had someone comment on a video today, and she said, along with a whole bunch of other comments, one of the things she said was, yoga teachers are a dime a dozen. And she was a yoga teacher. I would expect that comment maybe from someone who wasn't a teacher, who was observing yoga teachers as a student, maybe going from class to class to class and just reflecting on a perspective that yoga has become sort of commoditized, that it's pretty similar from class to class to class. I wouldn't expect that sort of comment from a yoga teacher. And when I read that, my heart sank. Because number one, I really feel for that yoga teacher. If she truly believes that yoga teachers are a dime a dozen and she's out there teaching, that's just sad. Instead of thinking, I'm out here teaching in my own unique way that only I can teach, knowing that I am making an impact and feeling at the end of every class like I am in my dharma, That's how I feel. I never feel like I am a dime a dozen yoga teacher. I am 100% a unique yoga teacher because I have such conviction behind every single thing I do when I teach my classes. Every single thing I say, every single thing I offer, I have conviction, meaning I believe. I have intention behind what I'm doing. It is unwavering. I know I am doing what I am meant to do on this planet, and I know the benefits that it provides to people in body and mind. But I know for a lot of yoga teachers, they don't have that sense of conviction. And so when a comment like that comes up, or a question like this, how can I make my classes stand out? The answer, my dear, is as plain as the nose on your face. Just be yourself, because no one else can be yourself. But if you're practicing with your class, how are you being yourself? How do your students get to experience you when all they get to experience is seeing you do the same thing they're doing? Instead of hearing your voice as you walk around the room, hearing maybe a story or a little Dharma talk, hearing a cue that's customized to what a student is experiencing, seeing you more, hearing your voice more, having opportunities to connect with you more through your voice, which they can hear more because you're walking around. I mean, that's just one example. If you're teaching your classes in a way where your sequence reflects what you love, nobody can mimic that. Nobody can hijack that. Nobody can repeat that. It becomes your method. That's why I call it the signature sequence, because it's your signature. So that's my answer to that question. Obviously, there's a lot more I can say on each one of these, but for time purposes, we'll move on. Okay, so I'm actually going to just skip to, just for time purposes. There's a question here. How do I keep students engaged and coming back? I already spoke to that in question number 1, simply by reminding you to just encourage your students to come back. Give them things to work on and come back and report back to you. Give them, again, this is another reason for signature sequencing, teaching them a signature sequence and encouraging them to come back to continue to learn it. The last question here that I'll speak on is, what are the best ways to continue growing as a teacher? The best way, I don't want to say to continue growing, the best way to grow as a teacher is to know, where do you want to go and what do you need to get there? Because even asking this question is a reflection of someone who's looking for an answer outside of them, and the answer resides inside them, right? If I say to you, let's say you're my mentor, and I say to you, what's the best way for me to grow as a teacher? I'm asking you something that I'm really the one that owns the answer to that. And if you and I were working together inside my program, or let's say, and this happens all the time when I talk to teachers on Zoom or on the phone, or that's mostly how I do it. I mean, I might start out talking to somebody in the DMs or in email, but then I like to try to get them on a phone call or a Zoom call to really have a good conversation with them. I don't get on those calls and say, okay, so we had a couple of emails back and forth, and it sounds to me like you need to learn anatomy. So here's how I can teach you anatomy inside my program. I don't say that. That's not helpful to somebody. I always have conversations with teachers where I simply say, what do you want to do? What kind of yoga teacher do you want to be? What would help you feel really confident when you're teaching? What would allow it to feel so easy for you when you go into your classes and teach? What are some things that you'd like to do that you feel like you can't do now? Do you see how I'm putting it on you? But I'm asking questions that are focused on results, that are focused on transformation, that are focused on vision, rather than asking me, what are some ways that I can grow? I don't know. I mean, of course I know. But why would you want somebody to prescribe for you how you should grow? You know how you should grow. If you can't sleep at night because you're worried about your class coming up the next day, I would bet that's something you'd like to fix. If you're teaching your classes and you see people out of alignment and you have no idea how to help them, I bet you'd like to fix that too. If you go into your classes and you can't remember your sequence and you're constantly looking at your notes, I would bet a result you'd like is to be able to go in the room and just remember your sequence without notes, right? Like the answer to this question resides in you. And it does not reside in the answer of get a 300-hour training under your belt or take 500 hours of training. It does not reside there. So if you're hearing this question and you're thinking, yeah, that's a question I have. What should I be doing to grow as a yoga teacher? I took a 200 hour. Should I take a 300 hour? Should I take a 500 hour? I don't know. How is hours going to equal results? I mean, there are some really niche programs out there that could fit the bill in that regard. Let's say, for instance, you said to me, Karen, I've been teaching adult yoga for a while, and I really, really feel pulled to teach children. But I don't really have any experience teaching children. But I have kids, and I used to be an elementary school teacher, and I really would love to teach kids yoga. A really good fit for that person would be to take a specific training. Maybe let's just say there's a 300-hour training out there for how to teach kids yoga. That would be a really good match because this person's clear on the vision they have. This 300-hour training specifically teaches people how to teach kids. That checks all the boxes. But when someone comes to me with a list of problems they're having as a teacher that live in the more common space that I hear about all the time, the not feeling confident, the not feeling empowered, the feeling like I'm lost, the feeling like I'm overwhelmed, the feeling like the bar is so high and I can't ever possibly be there, the feeling of pressure, the feeling of I'm forgetting my sequence, I don't know how to cue, I don't understand anatomy. These are not questions that can be answered just by getting more hours of training. This is the kind of work that's answered by working with someone one-to-one. That's why I do my program one-to-one, because I know that to get you the results you want, you're not going to find that in just getting hours. The hours of general training doesn't typically check that box. It might. You would have to do a good amount of due diligence on a particular program to know that it's going to solve your problems. And I think part of the problem is that oftentimes teachers don't start out with what is the result they want. They start out with the industry narrative, which basically holds out this idea that a 500-hour teacher is better than a 200-hour teacher. And I totally don't agree with that. I've had many teachers with over 1,000 hours of training enroll in my program, and they've been teaching for years and they don't feel confident. So what does that tell you? It tells you what I've learned, which is your confidence as a yoga teacher is not found in the hours of training you have. It's more found in your willingness to experiment with different things in your classes so you can find what works for you. And to find what works for you really takes busting through a lot of beliefs that you may have about what you think teaching should look like. Again, it gets back to when you said before, when I said you said, and I realize we're having this sort of fake conversation, how long do I need to stay with the signature sequence? It's that word need, that word should. These are words that you would say to me that would ring in my brain like, oh, this person has a belief there. Because anytime you think you need to do something or you should do something, it's because you think somebody's telling you that's the way to do it. So anytime you hear yourself saying, oh, I need to do this, ask yourself, says who? Says who? And then you'll realize, oh, it's just that teacher I saw on Instagram, or oh, it's just that training I went to and that one teacher said that was the way she teaches her class. So great, that's the way she teaches her class. That doesn't mean you have to teach it that way. Even my videos, I'm not making these videos saying this is the way you should teach. So watch them with a critical eye and see, is this something you want to try? That's why I say the road to confidence is not through hours, it's through trying different things in your classes so that you can find the thing that works best for you. Okay, so that's it for the questions. I hope you found this interesting. What I will say is, a lot of what we talked about today touches on the two main aspects of teaching, cueing and sequencing. And then I also talked a lot about doing the walk and talk. I have 3 training videos. One is about sharing effective, clear cues. One is about how to create a signature sequence. And one is about how to do the walk and talk. In the show notes for today's episode, I will include links to each of those training videos. So you can just look at the show notes. If you're listening to this on your phone, just pull it up there. If you're watching it on YouTube, you'll see right in the caption for the episode, you'll see the links to those videos. If you can't find them, just send me a DM on Instagram and I'm happy to send them to you. And the last thing I'll say is, as you're watching this or listening to this, if you're looking for support on a weekly basis, I can support you inside my month-to-month membership called the Yoga Teacher Confidence Club. And for just $29 a month, you can join the club with a whole bunch of other yoga teachers and join us in weekly workshops. And even if you can't make the weekly workshop, you can watch the replay inside the club video portal. And that'll give you a way to watch the replays of the workshops we've done so far. And if you miss any of them, that's how you can watch. There's still value for you to gain, even if you can't come to the workshops. And the other thing I'll mention about the Yoga Teacher Confidence Club is the workshop topics every week are different. Some weeks I talk about cueing, some weeks I talk about sequencing, some weeks I talk about anatomy, some weeks I talk about mindset. So those 4 pillars of training, of teaching, are the topics for the week-to-week workshops. So it's really one of the fastest ways to build your skills around cueing, sequencing, and to learn a little bit about the anatomy. Now, if you prefer one-on-one training, and if anatomy is really what you need to learn, what you want to learn, my one-on-one program is the better fit for you. And I can share both of those links with you if you send me a DM on Instagram, or you can find links to both of those programs right on my website, barebonesyoga.com, and the link to my website is in the show notes. You can also link to both of my programs right off my Instagram, because I'm very clear and transparent about these are the 2 ways I can work with you. If you're ready to jump from the free content I provide here on the podcast and on my social media channels to a more custom experience. And a more custom experience is always going to get you where you want to be faster. Nothing bad or wrong about being in the free content pool as we are right now on the podcast. But if you really are ready and you really want to transform as a teacher, it costs money. It just does. It's like anything else in life. But remember, I created the membership at just $29 a month to give you a really easy thing to do to start to move forward. And I made it super affordable on purpose, even though it's worth so much more than that. I just made it $29 so that you would have absolutely no reason to say, I can't afford it. If you're someone who has a phone, who's watching stuff on social media, you're watching this on your laptop, I'm sure you've got $29. And again, it's all a matter of, what do you value? Do you value being the kind of teacher you want to be? If you do, the money isn't really an issue. It's something else. And so if there is something else blocking you from being a yes to moving forward as a teacher, let me know what that is. I'm happy to talk to you about it, not to convince you, but just to hear what's stopping you. Because ultimately, my goal is to work with teachers who want to, I don't want to say be better. They want to be the kind of teacher they dream of being, no holds barred. And so if you want that, but you feel some resistance, let me know what that is, and I'm happy to talk through that with you. All right. Well, thank you so much for watching here on YouTube. Thank you for listening to the audio version. It's been great to be with you, and I can't wait to connect with you again next week on the next episode of Conversations for Yoga Teachers. Namaste.